So let's go ahead and get started with guide number 2 for Car Mechanic Simulator 21, getting started. We'll go back into our guide save. We'll do the second story car and see if there's some other tips and tricks that we can learn along the way. So we'll hit play, go into our guide save, and continue and load up, and we'll get into the second guide. Hopefully you guys found the first guide helpful. Lucas, I'm talking to you specifically. I hope this helped you. So once you load into the game, again, everything is going to be on that interaction wheel. To access your interaction wheel, you either highlight over something and right click, or just off into space somewhere and right click and you'll get your default wheel. We're going to go to our orders, which is the phone, and we're going to take this 2015 Griffin Tyro job. So let's read this. Hi, my name's Jonah. I was referred here by my neighbor. He's a car dealer. I hear that your repair shop has been up and running since quite recently, but you look like a promising mechanic. Sure. It's almost annual service time. My buddy doesn't seem to have any problems, but I'll leave it to you to decide. I'm assuming he's calling his car his buddy. Please change the oil, filters, fill the missing fluids. I haven't had time for that recently. John mentioned that there was also a tapping in the camshaft. I don't know what he meant. Perhaps it'll make more sense to you. Please take care of my car and have a good day. We know at the very least we have to change the oil, drain it, and refill it with new, and then there'll be other tasks that we have yet to identify. So let's go ahead and highlight this and hit take order. And here's the car. It's a Cooper Mini, but again, apparently the folks over here at Playway did not pay the folks at Cooper to use the Mini name, so the car's name is a Griffin Tyro. And again, to find that, you just right click on the car. It'll bring up the interaction window. We got a whole bunch of options, but we're going to go to car status and you can see the name of the car. And when you're on car status, go to phone and we can see a link of all the things we have to repair. Now it already is telling us some things that have to be done. A belt tensioner, a couple of brake pads, cam gears, an idler roller, ignition coil, oil filter, some rubber bushings, a serpentine belt, a couple of spark plugs, and 4 parts that we have yet to discover. And then here we have to change the oil and refill it with new, change the brake fluid, change the coolant, power steering, and refill some windshield washer fluid. So first step that I would do when you get these new cars, customer cars in, right click on the car and on the wheel of interaction here, go to examine mode. And as you examine the car, those parts that they already identified as abnormal, they're going to be highlighted with a color. The color scheme here tells you how bad a shape they're in. Red is the worst condition. Orange is somewhere, I think, between 30 and 50% condition for the part. The yellow's in the, we'll say, 75-ish range, and then green is generally a fair condition item. So you can see there's an ignition coil right there on, we'll call that cylinder 1, that is marked orange. The rubber bushings on the chassis frame there, those are orange. There's rubber bushings on these beams in the back that are red. And you can also see right in there inside the caliper, there's a brake pad there that is red, and the brake pad on this side that is red. So those will be our first things that we can target. Now, to figure out what else is going wrong with this car, and this is my advice, when you take a new customer car on, it has a problem, and you're not sure what's going on, let's right click on this, get back into normal view. Let's open the hood. Let's get into the engine compartment just by left clicking in the engine compartment. Right click on the engine compartment and go to your additional tools. Now we just bought these at the end of our last guide series. So we have an OBD scanner, an onboard diagnostic tool scanner. We have the compression tester, the electronic multimeter, a tread tester, and a fuel pressure test. So let's go ahead and do these. Now the advantage to doing these tests, once you run them, you're going to find out something about the parts that tool can test and diagnose. So this is the fuel tester we're running. And we're going to get information on the fuel system, typically the fuel filter, fuel pump, fuel injectors. So here we go. We got injectors that are fine, the fuel pump is fine, and the fuel filter is fine. So we know the fuel system is fine, and that's not going to be one of the parts that is unidentified here as parts that are not discovered. Okay, so we did that test. Go back into here now. Again, to get into this, right click on it, additional tools. We did the fuel pressure test. Let's just check on the tires. They look okay, but you know, we're a mechanic. We're going to look for other things that we could potentially repair and obviously make money, but also make sure the car is safe for your customer, right? That's what we're here to do. All right, the tires look okay. And just to make sure they didn't want to replace 78% tires, let's go here to the other tasks, or to the second page here. And those were not the 4 parts that were discovered. So as you're doing a customer's car, you find the parts that are damaged and need to be repaired. They will pop up on this list. They will no longer be parts that are undiscovered. So if you find parts that are in poor condition, but the customer is not worried about those parts, or they don't want those parts replaced, they won't pop up on this list as parts that have been identified. All right, it's lunchtime here. I just finished some leftover Christmas ham. It was tasty, and I'm washing it down with the Pepsi Max. I apparently have a Pepsi Max issue, friends. Just letting you all know. So let's go back to our additional tools. Fuel pressure test, we did that. We did the tire tread test. Let's do the electronic multimeter. So that'll check some of the electronics on the car. The battery, which you can use your own voltmeter at home to check your own car battery. Very useful tool. And it checks the other electronic systems in the car, including spark plugs, which we already know are screwed up. So we'll get our voltmeter test is done here. Now the other advantage to using these tools, you just heard that ding in the background, we leveled up. Every time you use a diagnostic tool, you get some experience for doing this. So it's beneficial to do that. And we see here the radiator fan, housing fan was fine, the relays are fine, the fuses were fine, alternator's fine. Actually, everything here tested out okay, which is good. So one more diagnostic tool, the compression tester and the OBD, or 2 more, excuse me. Compression test, and then we'll do the onboard diagnostic scan. So let's do a compression test. The consumer, or the customer in this case, had said there was something going wrong with their camshaft. So doing a compression test, that'll check your pistons, your piston rings. We know the camshaft was bad, so we know we're going to replace at least one camshaft. The other one's at 84%, so we're fine. This has got a dual cam 4-cylinder engine. The 4 pistons look okay, got good compression. The piston rings are okay, so that's good. So we know we don't have to get underneath the car and take out pistons, which is useful. And then one more test, our OBD scan. Let's go ahead and do that. There we go. So we know there's some spark plugs that were bad, 2 of them. An ignition coil that's bad. We've already identified that. And everything else there tested out okay. Now another thing you could do is if you go back into examine mode, you can put your old mechanic peepers on parts, and there's some things that your mechanic can identify just by examining that would say, boy, this part, the mechanic could identify the condition of the part. So you just click and hold your left click. I'm doing it on the engine, so he's going to start looking at the engine parts and can start to identify some parts that may or may not be in good condition. You can see the engine head cover there was yellow, and I'm out of things to test. Okay, check the power steering thing, that's fine. Windshield washer fluid looks okay. Now you can keep doing this as much as you want to. Now the benefit to this, we're identifying parts, and you'll notice, watch our experience. Each time we identify a part as either in, or identify the condition of the part, we're getting some experience. So this is actually a fairly easy way to start leveling your character, and also potentially identify parts of the car that need improvement, or find that missing part for the customer car that is screwed up. All right, this looks good. Looks like the suspension system here in the front we pretty much got a good handle on. Exhaust system here looks okay. Let's check the rear suspension system. That looks okay. Most of this stuff is coming out and testing out fine, so we'll go ahead and get through all this. Since we did level up, there'll also be a skill point that we can place. Just go ahead and test the other side here. And you'll know you can't identify everything with your mechanics peepers initially. That's eyes, of course. But there's definitely a lot of stuff you can pick up. So I find this useful. And like I said, we already know some of these parts that we're going to be replaced have already been identified as red. So we know we got the brake pads on the back, those rubber bushings there, the rubber bushings here at the front need to be replaced. We still have 4 parts that we have to identify, and we have some camshaft work to do, which is just at the top of the engine head. All right, so that gives us an idea. Now, we could do this even before bringing the car into the shop. Let's go ahead and just fill the washer fluid. That's easy. Pop into the engine compartment. We'll click on the top of the washer fluid. The bottle will be like this. As soon as the bottle tips, we've got enough washer fluid. The other fluids we have to drain. So we'll go to our drain tool. Let's drain the rad fluid. We'll do that right here in the parking lot. And on the back of the engine compartment on the firewall is where the brake fluid is at, and then the power steering fluid is right there in the power steering fluid container. And right click, part unmount. Let's unmount the cap and put in some new coolant, excuse me. Coolant is in. Let's put in some power steering fluid. You ever driven a car without power steering? That is not fun. You have to have some muscles to move those cars. And some brake fluid. Alright, so that's in. So let's go ahead and move our car into our lift. We know we got to drain the fluid. We have some suspension work, some cam work to do. Let's do that brake issue first. Now, if we go into examine mode here, let me show you something. There's some parts here that we couldn't identify with the mechanic's eyes in examine mode. You see how the brakes here are in gray, the wheels in gray? We couldn't identify those parts. So let's go back to normal mode. I'm going to click on this wheel. Look at this brake. That brake looks terrible. Just the amount of rust buildup on it. And the reason I'm saying that is that we know we had to do rear brakes, rear brake pads. I'm wondering if those 4 unidentified parts could be potentially brakes. Let's check the other wheel here. Yeah, see how rusty that is? Now, if we're in examine mode, we couldn't identify that, but that doesn't mean you physically can't look at the part and say, well, does this part look bad or not? So to identify the condition of the part, you can use examine mode. The other way to identify it, just remove the part. If you're ever curious, is this part good or not? Take it off the car. So we're going to pop this wheel off, and I'll show you what I mean. Go to my inventory, boom. So now I know this rim was at 77%. The tires, we already used our tread tool, so we knew the condition of the tires, but we didn't know the condition of the rim, but now we do. So that's a neat tool. Let's check on the calipers here. Let's take the caliper off. And this brake pad looks rusty as heck. Let's pop that off and pop off this vented disc brake. Okay, that vented disc brake's in red. The brake pad's 24%. Now I'm curious, if I right click on my car, go to car status, now we only have 2 parts that are not discovered. So those brake pads are bad, and there you go. Brake disc ventilated. So those were 2 of the parts that we had to replace. So okay, so that's cool. Let's pop over to the other wheel. Now to do this for myself, you can use WASD, just like walking around in most games, to change the view when you're targeted on a part. So I'm going to use one of those keys to look down. Here's the right wheel. Click on it, and it moves your mechanic to that wheel. That's a good way of moving your mechanic around the car when you're working on a vehicle. Let's pop this wheel off, and let's inspect the front brakes. And by inspect it, I mean let's just take the brakes off and visually inspect them. All right, take the caliper off, brake pad, and vented disc brake. Go to our inventory. This one's at 27%. That brake pad was 25%. Let's check the car status. And now we have identified every part. And look at that. All 4 brake pads on this car needed to be replaced, and the front disc needed to be replaced. So now we know all the parts that are broken on this car that we have to deal with. We already did our fluids, so that part is done. We have to change the oil. And when you change the oil, most of the time you're going to do an oil filter. So we know we're going to have to deal with that. And then why don't we deal with the brakes? We can do the rubber bushings, which we're going to need 4 of those. And then we can deal with the engine work. We'll go in that kind of order. So first step, let's get the oil draining. Let's go over here to our oil drain tool. You click on the tool with your left click, move the equipment, and then it'll give you options. If we had 2 lifts, you could move it to the second lift. We only have 1 lift in the shop so far, so move it to lift 1. Car has to be up in the air to move this underneath it, obviously. Then left click on the tool again, hit use equipment, and then you can see the oil draining. That's done. We can move the equipment back. There we go. And let's pop the oil filter off. We know we need that. And up here, these were those rubber bushings that were bad. Here's a rubber bushing here. Again, to remove a part, you just click your left click, hold it till the green wheel's filled, and then if there's a bolt to remove, you're going to have to left click and hold it to remove the bolt. And go to our inventory. 2 bad rubber bushings. Look at that. They're 12 and 13%. They're bad. And there were rubber bushings in the back here, right? It was this one that was red and this one that was red. Now, if I go to remove those right now, just click on them, pop off the rubber bushing. Over to this one, click on it, pop off the rubber bushing. Done. So we got those 2 rubber bushings, which were also in bad shape. So we need to buy 4 rubber bushings. And then let's take this wheel off because we knew the brake pads in the back were bad. We knew that from the beginning just by examining the car and the list of parts that we knew had to be replaced. Now look at this brake disc. This one, there's a little bit of wear on it, but it's not rusty like those front brake pads. So just laying your eyes on it can kind of tell you this one's in fair condition. Take the caliper off, and I'm just doing a close-up zoom. There's the brake pad. Take the brake pad off. So we know that one's bad. Let's go to the other side here. If you want to zoom, I have it set to my mouse wheel, so you can zoom in on a part and zoom out on a part. Click on that next wheel. Let's take this wheel off. Pop off the bolts. There we go. And we'll take off the caliper. And get off the brake pad. Okay. So now if we look at our inventory, there are parts here that we need to replace, right? We need to replace 4 brake pads. So I can just right click on that 2, 3, 4 times. I just added 4 brake pads to my shopping list. I need 2 vented brake discs, 4 rubber bushings. Those we need to replace. So that's where we're at right now. Oh, and an oil filter. Okay, so if I look at my shopping list, I have 4 brake pads, 2 vented disc brakes, 4 rubber bushings, and an oil filter. Now, at the end of our last guide 1, I bought a tablet. Now, in the first video, we had to get out of this car, go over to the computer, and buy these parts. Now that we have the tablet, go to T. boom, your tablet, you're on the car working on it, hit T, and I can go straight to my shop. This is a, it seems like a silly thing, but it actually does save you some time. So now we're into our car parts. For brakes, I have it on the shopping list. I could click on it, but honestly, I just clicked the brake thing. Brake pads, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 brake pads, done. And I need 2 vented disc brakes. 2. Bought. Great. Now if I go to my shopping list, I'll take the brake pads off. Let's get rid of the vented disc brakes. Now I need rubber bushings. So I click on it, it's searching for it. Now why is it not popping up here? It's because I'm on the brake section. Just change it to all parts. There's rubber bushings. We need 1, 2, 3, 4. Done. Take that off your shopping list and let's get the oil filter. And take it off your shopping list. Okay. So now we're right here on the car. Right click on that disc brake, go to part and mount, and we will get the outline of the part, and then it'll give you the option of the parts that would fit in that spot. We obviously have the old pads still in our inventory. We don't want to put the old ones back on. You just select the 100% one. Put on the caliper. And a caliper is a 2-part component. I might have done that pretty quick, but there's the caliper and the caliper cylinder. So when you click on the caliper, you have to select the caliper cylinder, and then you can attach the 2 bolts to mount the caliper. Then we need to put the rubber bushing on here. Again, select the 100% rubber bushing, not the red ones. Attach the bolt. And then we can see the rubber bushing over here that we need to attach. Click on that. Well, maybe I can. There we go. And we'll put on 100% rubber bushing. Slide our mechanic around to see the bolt easier. Attach the bolt. There we go. And then this brake pad, click on it. It moves your mechanic to the brake pad. Put on 100% brake pad. Grab the caliper and the caliper cylinder. Attach the 2 bolts. And then we'll put the wheel on. This car, thankfully, has the same size wheels in the front and the back, so you don't have to pay too close attention. You just slap on the next wheel. We just say we did a free tire rotation, right? Done. So that wheel is done. The bushings in the back are done. Let's click to the front, and we'll put on the vented disc brake, the 100% one, the nice new brake pad. Put on the brake caliper cylinder, attach the 2 bolts, which are on the back side there, and the wheel. Got it. Then there's a rubber bushing here. Put that rubber bushing on, the 100% one. Great. There's another rubber bushing. Put that one on. Excellent. And then here is the other side. Vented disc brake. The brake pad. The caliper and the caliper cylinder. And a wheel. So having some planning about how you're going to move around the car sometimes can save you some time as well. So this wheel is done. Let's right click on it, go to our car status, and you can see here's the vented disc brakes. The brake pads are green check boxed. The rubber bushings are green check boxed. Now we have some spark plugs, a serpentine belt, the oil filter, which we already purchased, so we can place that back on. Ignition coil, camshaft. Now these are all in the belt or in the engine compartment, so we got to get there, and then we just have to put the new oil in. So last thing we're going to do under the car, let's put the oil filter back on. Not the 65, the 100%. Okay. Now to get into the engine compartment, you actually have to pull the car out of the air. So do that. Out of the air. Now, here's an interesting thing as far as repairing things that have 4 of the same components, like spark plugs, ignition coils. if you're just going to repair one, you have to put the new one in the same spot that where the bad part was. Let me explain what I mean. So if we go to the examine mode, you see here the ignition coil in cylinder 1 is orange. Next one is green, the next one's yellow, the next one's green. So those three, and we'll call it cylinder 2, 3, and 4, you can put the old ignition coils in there. If we put one of the old ignition coils, let's say the yellow one, we put it on cylinder 1, it would not count as having repaired that one. You have to put the new part on in the same spot where the crappy part was at, if that makes sense. So we'll just have to remember, normal mode, that the ignition coil that we're going to end up replacing is going to go here on position 1. I'm going to take this off, and I can kind of see, looking down the into the spark plugs, it looks like it's cylinder 1 and 3 that have bad spark plugs because they're more rusted than the other plugs. But there's an easier way to look at this. Let's take this cover off first. There, the cover's off. You can kind of see down there a little bit easier now. So see if we can get into examine mode here and see into those pistons. No, or see those spark plugs. That's hard to see. That's too bad. So you're gonna have to look at them this way. If you look in cylinder 1, see how rusty that spark plug is? Here you can see some white on the spark plug. It's not rusted. And here that spark plug is not too bad. So if we just take out the first spark plug on cylinder 1, you can see it's a 31% spark plug. And if I take out spark plug on cylinder 3, it's the 26% spark plug. So the other two we're going to leave in, so that way we remember where to put those bad spark plugs in. In fact, while we're already in here, let's just do it right now. Let's go into our shop. We have to go home. Spark plugs are sold in the electronics parts store. So if I just type into the search spark plug, enter. There's spark plugs. We're going to buy 2. And we'll right click, go to part mount. Let's mount in a new spark plug. Let me show you what I mean here. So spark plug is check marked, right? So we fixed the spark plug. Now watch this. Let's go to part unmount. Let's take out the nice spark plug. Let's take out cylinder 2 spark plug, just as an example. So if you ever did this and you're wondering why you didn't satisfy because you thought you replaced the parts, this would be why. So let's go to part mount. Mount spark plug. Now you see this is a 78% spark plug here. That's the one from cylinder 2. It's still a fine spark plug, and if we just left it in cylinder 2, the game would think that's perfectly fine. Now watch what happens if I put the 78% spark plug in cylinder 1. Go here to car status. It no longer satisfies the spark plug. Even though that was a spark plug, if it was in cylinder 2, it would be fine. For the completion of the job that we were hired to do, that does not count. There's been a couple of customer jobs in these story orders in particular. I was getting very frustrated because I had pulled all the spark plugs. I bought 2 new ones. I put in 100%, 100%, and then the 2 that were average spark plugs that they said I didn't have to replace, and I didn't complete the mission, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, why? I put in new spark plugs. Why did this not satisfy? It's because of the position I put them into the engine. So starting to remember that. Now, when you get a lot of money, honestly, just buy them 4 new spark plugs and just throw all 4 of them in. Who cares? Then you don't have to worry about this. But when you're first leveling up and money is kind of tight, you're only going to buy the 2 spark plugs you actually need to replace. So I put the 78 one back in position 2. Let's put the 100% spark plugs in 1 and 3. And just for kicks, go to our car status, and both spark plugs are satisfied. So we're covered. All right. So now the next thing we have to do, let's go to right click part unmount. We have to take out this camshaft. You see how this camshaft here is just terribly rusted, and the one over here is fine? If you wanted to look at it in a different fashion, you could exit out, go to examine mode. You can see that one is orange, that one camshaft is green. We know the orange one is the one we're going to take out. So how can we get the camshaft off? So there's these camshaft bearings on top that have to be removed first. So you just click on it. That tells you the mechanic, remove this part, then highlight the 2 bolts, takes off that little bearing. Click on it, 2 bolts, that's off. So the bearings are out that's holding this in place. If you look on this side of this 4-cylinder, there's a little timing chain on this side with a timing cover. So let's take this off. 4 bolts. 5 bolts. Oh, I missed one. And then there's this gear that goes on the back side of that camshaft. Take that one off. And then let's go over to the other side. There's a timing cover here and a timing gear and chain behind this timing cover. To get to the timing cover, we have to take off the crank gear. So to get that gear off, we have to take off this belt, which is held on by this pulley. So let's take off that pulley first. Okay, one pulley off, take off the belt, and we'll take off this gear. And now we can get the timing cover off. And I always kind of move the mechanic around so I can kind of look at the bolts I'm removing. It just makes life easier. Now you can get in here and you can see this pulley's rusted to heck, the belt tensioner's rusted to heck, and the cam gear is rusted to heck. We already knew those were parts we're going to have to replace. This is an idler roller A. Generally, when you're going to take off a timing chain or a belt, always look for the belt tensioner. This is what a belt tensioner looks like. That's going to be the part you remove first. That's off. Then we can pull the belt. We can take off the pulley. And we can take off the cam gear, which is held on with a bolt. Cam gear is off. Then if I pop up here, I can now take the camshaft off. Camshaft is off. All right, so now we've removed all the parts that we know we need to replace. So let's go into our inventory list. We know we need a new camshaft, right? So let's right-click on that. The cam gear was one we had to replace. The idler roller A we have to replace. The serpentine belt for an inline 4B we have to replace. And the belt tensioner we have to replace. Spark plugs we already took care of. And there was one ignition coil we need to replace. So I right-clicked on that. Escape, hit tab. That brings us to our tablet. I hit home to go back to the main store page. Let's go to our car parts shop. Pull up my parts list. Camshaft, 250 credits for that. Take the camshaft off the parts list. Get the cam gear, 130 bucks. Man, the gear is almost as much as the camshaft. Idler roller A, 20 credits. Now later in the game, this is a piece of advice. Idler roller A's, rubber bushings, spark plugs, those are parts that are universal across almost every car in the game. A lot of times when they're just cheap parts like this, I will buy a pile of them. The max you can buy typically in one lot is 50. I'd buy 50. Just keep them in my inventory, and then the next car I repair or the next car I restore, I'll have a pile of spark plugs, I'll have a pile of idler roller A's, I'll have a pile of rubber bushings, and I don't have to go to the store just to buy one thing or one little part. Early in the game, obviously, we only have 1,200 credits. I would not do that, but that's just advice as you start planning for your late game what you want to do. So buy one idler roller A. Remove that from our shop list. Serpentine belt. Good. Belt tensioner. And one ignition coil. Now, I just put that into this shop. It didn't come up. It's an electronics part. So go home, over to the electronics store, ignition coil, and buy one ignition coil. Now, as you recall, that was on cylinder 1. I named them from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the one that we had to replace with the brand new part. So we'll get escape to get out of our tablet. Then we can pop back in here and we can start mounting the parts that we just took off. So go to right click, part mount, camshaft, obviously put in the nice new 100% one. Come down to here, put the gear on, a nice new gear. There we go. And I clicked on that wall of that engine so I could see closer. There's an idler roller pulley first. Nice new one. Nice new belt. And the belt tensioner. Again, select the 100% one. Then we can put the cover on, the timing cover. And I'm just going to slide my mechanic around to see where the other bolts are. Or zoom out a little bit. Zoom out and move around, and then I can see there's 2 more bolts waiting to get put in. Okay, then I can click down here on the crankshaft pulley. Attach that with its bolt. Put back the belt that was there before. And the idler pulley. This was one we didn't have to replace, so we can just put the original one on. That was a 78% one. Okay, that side is done. If you recall, there was a timing chain on the other side, so this cam gear we'll put back on with its bolt. And then the small cover here. It's 5 bolts. Okay. And then the camshaft bearings. Attach those back. I think I called them camshaft bearings. The actual name is a camshaft cap. Those are reattached. Then we can put on the engine head cover and attach the bolts. What I do when I'm attaching multiple bolts like this, honestly, I'm just holding down left click and I just move my cursor to the next bolt. So this is what we had called cylinder 1. So we're going to put the 100% ignition coil there. And the rest of these were the parts that did not need to be replaced, so we'll just put in order the next reasonable level ignition coil. And we'll be left with the 39% one that we had replaced. And let's right click on this, go to our car status, and make sure every part has a checkbox. And it does. So that story order part is done. The last thing we have to do, we already put the oil filter back on. We have the engine cover back on and the camshaft in. So let's put some oil in. So to do that, we just go to right click, part unmount. Let's unmount the fill cap and hold your left click down to put the oil in. And as soon as it tips over, we have enough oil. And you just ungo with your left click, and then we can find the dipstick. There she is. And the oil is right in the middle of the hash marks. Escape. Car status. And we'll just double check to make sure everything's got green check boxes. It does. Go to customer repair order, the CR tab. You can see for this job with our bonuses and all of our other tasks, we're going to get it 1,983 credits. Hit finish order. And we leveled up to level 4. If we go to our inventory, we got a case again like we did last time. Let's go ahead and open the case. I think last time I picked the first card and the second card. So just to, I think maybe I didn't. Regardless. Let's pick the third card. Hey, we got some extra XP. That took us up to level 5. And a bonus case, which is very cool. So now we got another case, so we just hit open next case. Let's open the 5th one and the first one. So more XP and some scrap. This blue scrap material, it's the other resource that you can use in this game that's used later in the game to augment parts to make them 1-star, 2-star, or 3-star parts. For performance parts, let's say a performance spark plug that could increase the performance of your car by 2%. If you go from a performance spark plug to a 1-star, it'll go to maybe 2.5%. To a 2-star, maybe 3%. 3-star, maybe 3.5%. So as you use this scrap resource to improve parts, you'll get extra performance out of it. So that's the benefit to this resource. And using these crates, that's the best way to get that resource. The other way to do it is you can scrap old crap parts, but you only get like one piece of blue scrap material per scrap, up to 3 if you do the minigame properly. You'll see what I'm saying later in the game. But just plant this in your brain. If I want scrap in the future, find ways to get cases. We'll talk more about that in a future video. All right, so now we have all these parts left over from that job we just did. The best one is a 65% oil filter. Later in the game, there'll be some of these parts that you can repair. So looking at this, the camshaft is a part that could be repaired. The cam gear is not, the belts are not, spark plugs are not, bushings are not. The vented disc brakes can actually be turned on a brake lathe, which you can get later in the game when you have expanded your shop. But right now, we don't have any of those options to us. So let's just sell these parts so that we get rid of the old parts and then we get a little extra money. So we'll sell everything below 66%, so it sells everything. And there we go. So now we're at 3,000 credits. And I'm going to hit escape and save game just to not lose what we just did. The other thing, we just leveled to 5, so we have some skill points. So the next place I would place my skill points, let's see, it's going to cost 2 points to get extra parking alleys, which we're not parking cars right now. And the parking alley is for your own cars that you're going to own and purchase. Getting the discounts here along this tree is very useful because it makes parts cheaper. But you're going to get some speed by having increased mounting and unmounting speed, and it only costs 1 skill point. We have 4 skill points to us, so let's unlock that. Same for the increased screwing speed, just makes it go a little quicker and it only costs 1 skill point, so we'll unlock that. Repairing parts is actually going to be very useful. Right now, we do not have a repair bench, so I don't feel like it's worth wasting my point on that right now until I have a repair bench. How do you get a repair bench? You have to have an expanded garage, which is going to cost us 10,000 credits. So it's going to be a little bit of time before we have the ability to do this. We could get a car wash now, which is pretty slick. And that's actually a decent way to make some money, is just taking a car, washing it, and selling it. You can actually make money doing that, believe it or not. But again, cost-wise, I don't think we need to do that yet. Salvaging, that's to get scrap. That costs 2,500 credits. Not something you need early game at all. The welder is actually a decent way to make some money too, but that'll be a later game deal. This is the brake lathe. You need the garage expansion for it. Same for the workbench. You need the garage expansion. So probably once we get 10 grand, that'll probably be one thing we'll end up having to buy in this guide video. But I'd want to be a little bit above it so we have a little bit of a cash cushion to buy the parts we need to repair customer cars. So we have 2 more skill points available to us. Let's go to the unmounting speed and make that quicker. Unlock that. There we go. So we don't have any more skill points available to us. We have a point into fast hands, strong arms number 2, and a regular customer for a cash discount. I think that's a good spot to save guide video number 2. The next one, guide video 3, we'll do a preview here, will be the next story order, which will be This is a Volvo, and we'll read through that next time. But thank you all for your attention. Hopefully you found this useful. Lucas, I hope you're digging these. Isaac, Parker, I hope you like them. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.